Incredibly thrilled to have Melissa Moore here to talk about sleep and the autism spectrum. Melissa, just so you know, I'm gonna plug your book. We should
Thank
put like a link to it before the end. She just finished a book. Oh, hold it up if you have it. That'd be amazing. So, she has a
I,
book.
I was looking for it. You know what? I don't have one
Oh
nearby.
my God, you should.
I
Okay,
know.
Stand by. Hold on.
when I was in UCLA, we had a guy there who was kind of an egoist, but he would like have a picture of his three books pop up. And, oh, how did that get in this slide deck? It's like, really, dude, you're totally pushing your book. But yeah, so we're thrilled to have you here, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to give us kind of a brief primer on it. We'd like to end, if we could, by about maybe 10 till or 5 till the hour,
Sure.
I
just
have
so if
I have
people.
the book.
Oh, there it is.
Thank you, Janice.
Oh, Janice, is yours signed, Janice?
Yes, it is. Funny you
Okay.
should say that.
Nice. Very good. So she will sign all of your books once you buy them. Good luck. You just have to travel
Just
to LA.
send a big box out here, or I should send a big box to you.
So thank you everybody for joining, and I will, Melissa, pass over to you. I'll turn my camera and my sound off. So all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here talking about my favorite thing to talk about, which is sleep, and especially in this group of just really esteemed friends and researchers and colleagues that I'm just really honored to be here today. And also special thanks to Janice Keener for introducing me to Steve and Courtney so that I could be here today. So thanks, everyone. I don't have any financial relationships to disclose. I do get royalties for webinars that I do and for my book, New World Library. If you've ever wondered what it's like to get a check for $3.36, this is kind of what that's like. And I won't be discussing any investigative use of commercial products. So today, after this talk, hopefully you'll be able to understand the scope and impact of sleep problems in people with autism, summarize key mechanisms underlying sleep, identify potential causes for sleep problems in autism, and then the behavioral approach to improving sleep problems in children and teens with autism. First of all, who cares about sleep? Why should we care? We know that not getting enough sleep, poor sleep quality, daytime sleepiness relates to many things. Social skills, so social competence, ability to recognize facial expressions, using facial expressions, positive peer interactions, emotional functioning. So it's really a key driver of emotion regulation. So, how many positive emotion words do you use? How can you um, use, again, going back to facial expressions, positive facial expressions, minimizing negative facial expressions, behavioral things like attention, concentration, repetitive behaviors, and neurocognitive functioning. So, the skills that kids need to be successful in school. There was one study, it's an older study, that showed that even 30 more minutes of sleep can impact neurocognitive functioning in elementary school age kids. And this is all for typically developing kids, all kids. So essentially, sleep really relates to overall dysregulation. When you're not getting enough, you're sleepy, you're overall more likely to be dysregulated. In autism in particular, we see a relationship with social skills, attention, hyperactivity, repetitive behaviors. And in the parents of kids with autism, we see an increase in auto accidents and job loss. And what you see in these studies that even when the effect sizes are small to medium, there's a big impact on those daytime behaviors and parent stress. So we know that it's important. The scope is also pretty wide. So many, if not most, I would say most in my experience, kids with autism do have sleep problems. Now, this is an incredible range, a wide range when you look at the research. So it can go from 15% to 86%, and it depends on many things. So, one, how is it measured? Is this parent report? Is this objective with something like actigraphy or an overnight sleep study? What is the definition of sleep problems? Are we looking for, total sleep duration? Are we looking at how much you wake, how long you're awake for. Do you wake too early? It really depends. And there isn't necessarily one definition of what a sleep problem is. And there are also multiple measures of sleep problems. More recently, I would say in the past few years, there have been more studies that are global, looking at kids all over the world in terms of autism and sleep. That hasn't necessarily been the case in the past, and that impacts the variability in sleep problems and then age. So when you're comparing kids with autism with typically developing kids, their sleep might not look that different at 6 months or even a year because all kids have difficult sleep during that time. But as they get older and typically developing kids start to have more consolidated sleep, they sleep at night, they're awake during the day, then those differences become more pronounced. The last thing is that sleep problems really persist across the whole lifespan. Changes in sleep emerge between 6 and 18 months. That number keeps getting earlier, that age keeps getting earlier and earlier as more research is done and we look at smaller changes in sleep, but we do see differences in sleep very early in terms of taking a long time to fall asleep, waking a lot during the night, being awake for a long time during the night, and then overall sleep duration. We know that these wakings tend to persist across childhood. So families are getting to the point where, their friends and family members, their kids are not waking up during the night anymore. But their child with autism may still be waking. Insomnia in adolescence is really common. So again, I would say the majority of adolescents with autism have insomnia at some point. And then even in adults, when they have really good sleep hygiene, we still see an increased risk of insomnia. And you can see this is from a study by Beth Mallow, who's an amazing pioneer in sleep research with autistic people. And here you can see the top graph is sleep apnea. The bottom one is dysomnia, so trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, and age is on the bottom. So you can see that these two areas of sleep problems really persist up until here you see age 22, and that difference is greater and greater. So just to recap that, there's a huge impact. Sleep impacts, all aspects of functioning. It affects most people with autism, and it persists across the lifespan. But before I wrap up this section, which, this is not great news, I want to give some good highlight here. This is another recent study by Beth Mallow looking at problematic daytime sleepiness. And if you look on the right, you can see the blue line is typically developing kids. The red line is kids with autism. And when you get through puberty, so like Tanner stage 5, actually, the typically developing kids report more sleepiness than the kids with autism. And there's other information showing that there's this small window where kids with autism might actually have better sleep than typically developing kids. My hypothesis is that there's more parental involvement when kids are neurodiverse, more parents at bedtimes, and just kind of more parental monitoring. So now that we know how important sleep is, I want to just talk about the basics of sleep because these are things that are really important for the families that you work with. There are two processes that really turn on sleep. The first is the circadian rhythm, and that's something that's internally biologically generated for everyone. You don't have to do anything. It just happens. It tells your brain when it's light out, you should be awake. When it's dark out, you should be asleep. Even though it's internally generated, it's strongly influenced by sunlight. That's the strongest influence, especially morning sunlight. By food, are you eating, dinner at 2 a.m.? That's giving your circadian rhythm the wrong input. And by exercise. The second mechanism is sleep pressure, and that is just what it sounds like. When you wake up in the morning, if you've had good sleep, your need for sleep shouldn't be there. You should have no need for sleep when you first wake up, but your need for sleep builds and builds and builds and builds, and it reaches kind of a threshold. At the same time, your circadian rhythm should be telling you it's nighttime and time to go to sleep, and that pushes you over the edge. Also, I know probably all of you know this, but once we're asleep, we go through sleep stages and we have about 4 to 6 sleep cycles per night. In each sleep cycle, you have light sleep, deep sleep, and dreaming sleep or REM sleep, and then your brain wakes up. So every sleep cycle actually ends with awaking. And this is really important information and something that most parents don't know. And the reason that this is so important is that anything that you need at bedtime to fall asleep, any environment, any person, anything that you need at bedtime is needed to get back to sleep during those normal night wakings. And so we all on this call, as well as our kids, our grandparents, our friends, everybody woke up about 4 to 6 times last night. We generally have no idea that it happened because we're so good at getting ourselves right back to sleep. But even, as an adult, like I sleep with 2 pillows. If one happens to fall on the floor during one of those normal night wakings, I will recognize that I'm awake because it's not there. And that is true for things like a parent, a bottle, anything that you have to fall asleep should be consistent all night long. So it's not often that kids with autism are waking up more than other kids. It's that they can't get themselves back to sleep. So now let's talk about autism at night. So why do kids with autism have more sleep problems? What to do about it? And then what else to do about it? So there are 4 main potential causes of sleep problems in people with autism. So first of all, the cause of the autism, which is, largely genetic, also might cause sleep problems. So genes might share specific uh, specific genes might be shared for autism and for sleep problems. Similarly, we know that genes, for example, for um, depression and anxiety also share insomnia, and that's probably also true for autism. Also, there can be differences in that circadian rhythm. So we know, for example, in kids with ADHD, that the circadian rhythm tends to be delayed. So you're feeling sleepy a little bit later. In kids with autism, interestingly, it's inconsistent. So one night the circadian rhythm might be telling you, hey, it's 2 in the morning, time for sleep. The next night it might tell you it's 2 in the morning, time to be wide awake. So that circadian rhythm is different. The other thing is the response to sleep pressure. So we know that the only thing that can take away sleep pressure is sleep, but we don't know in kids that are neurodiverse, is that sleep pressure taken away more quickly? Is that why there are more wakings or more early wakings? So there can be differences there. And then medical and behavioral sleep disorders are more common in kids with autism. So things like obstructive sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, insomnia, all of those sleep disorders are more prevalent in people that are neurodiverse. And then there are the comorbidities, and this is like the hugest bucket with all these things sloshing around that that are common in people with autism. So things like, constipation, pain, anxiety, ADHD, all the things that aren't sleep problems, or sorry, aren't sleep disorders, but cause sleep problems are in this bucket. And so when those comorbidities arise and they're more common in kids with autism, sleep problems are also more common. So here's a little bit of another way to look at what I was talking about. And this slide comes from Jody Mendel, who is another pioneer in behavioral sleep medicine. When I see a family and I'm asking all these questions, I am trying to figure out, okay, which bucket am I looking at here? Am I looking at a medical sleep disorder like sleep apnea, narcolepsy, restless legs? Am I looking at a behavioral sleep disorder like sleep hygiene problems, nightmares, insomnia? Or am I looking at this third bucket? And you can see there that autism is one of the things in that bucket. And insomnia, if you look at the studies, again, a lot of variability, but almost all kids with autism have insomnia. And so that's what we're going to talk about next, the diagnosis of insomnia. So in the sleep world, we have our own diagnostic manual, but this is also true in the DSM. So our diagnostic manual is the International Classification of Sleep Disorders. But it's the same info in the DSM, so you don't have to buy that book. But difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up early in kids and in people with autism in general, that complaint can come from the caregiver. It usually does come from the caregiver. The frequency has to be greater than or equal to 3 nights a week for 3 months. And it has to be in the context of an appropriate opportunity. So if I see kids all the time who have really busy really busy school schedules and after school schedules, sports, all the things, and the main complaint is that they're tired during the day, but they're not getting into bed until midnight and having to wake up at 6 a.m. That's not adequate opportunity. So you wouldn't call that insomnia. You see daytime impairment in functioning, and then obviously not explained by another sleep disorder or substance. How do we treat this? We use cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is used in different variations in kids and adults. What we see with cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is that parents actually prefer it over medications, which is surprising to me, to be honest, but they do. It can be done with or without medications. And in kids and in people with autism, often there's more B than C. So often we're using more behavioral techniques than cognitive restructuring. We also take a more naturalistic approach. So, for example, one of the active ingredients in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is sleep restriction. And in a typical adult, you would have them track how long they're actually sleeping in bed, and then you would only let them, or you would recommend that they're only in bed for that amount of time. So if someone tells me, I get into bed at 8, but I don't fall asleep till midnight and I wake up at 5 a.m., the first recommendation would be that you're only in bed for 5 hours. We don't do that in kids because we don't know the impact of that kind of sleep deprivation on a developing brain. And so what we do instead are things like, okay, if your child gets in bed at 7:30, but they don't fall asleep until 9, we would move the bedtime until 8:45. And once they're falling asleep relatively quickly, then we would move that bedtime earlier. But we use a more naturalistic approach to things like sleep restriction. We also have to have flexible treatment goals. So everyone would like to have a child that sleeps continuously for 10 hours, but sometimes we have to switch what our goal is. Sometimes we have to switch our goal to something like maintaining safety during that 2 hours that the child is awake during the night. And then our expected timeline is a little bit different. I'm still surprised by this, and I've been working in this field for more than 20 years, but when you're doing a behavioral intervention with a typically developing child in a typical environment, it is shockingly predictable. So usually, for example, if you're working on falling asleep independently, the first night can be hard. The second night often is even harder. And then by the third night, things start to improve. And in about 2 weeks, that intervention has led to great improvements. And in neurodiverse people, we can't say it like that. We can't be so specific about how long this is going to take. So now I just want to walk through what that treatment actually is. What might that look like? What can you recommend to families? The first step is really to communicate expectations. And I know this wasn't something that I had ever really thought of until I had my own children, but we aren't necessarily born understanding what sleep is or what the expectations are around it. Every day that I see families and I ask them about their bedtime routine, someone says, then we just go upstairs and get into bed. And I have to preface my questions with, I ask a lot of details here. I'm sorry, I know that can be hard, but it really helps me make the best plan. We need to communicate to our kids what those detailed explanations and expectations are. Oftentimes, bedtime involves stopping something that they want to do and starting something that they don't want to do, which is the bedtime routine. The bedtime routine can be full of sensory challenges. A few weeks ago, someone was describing to me what it was like for them to brush their teeth during the bedtime routine. And when I really took in what they were saying, it was so disturbing. Like just the sound of the toothbrush and the noise of the water being on and the gross taste of the toothpaste and the texture of the toothpaste, it really sounded awful for that person. And the bedtime routine is full of those kinds of things. Also, especially in kids, there is a window. And if you don't try to make this sleep and sleep routine happen during that window, it might be harder to fall asleep. And then after the routine, we get into bed and we fall asleep. So, what even is falling asleep? It involves a lot of things. The lights are out, you're lying down, your body's supposed to be calm, your voice is supposed to be quiet, your eyes are supposed to be closed. And then you wait for sleep, and then how do you even communicate how long you stay in bed? There are lots of things that all of you use in working with kids with autism in terms of other things. So there's like the first then approach, there are social stories, there are many things. And I really recommend using whatever is working for that child in other situations to communicate these expectations about sleep. So, you might say first brush teeth, then books, and you're reviewing that and you're using it in the context of the first then approach that you use for other things. A bedtime chart, it doesn't have to be a picture of the child in their exact bed. To be honest, I usually just use these kinds of icons. I'm not an artist, as you can tell, but just a visual schedule. And it doesn't matter whether the child can already tell time and name all the things that are in their bedtime routine. It still can be helpful to have a visual. This is just part of a social story that I used for someone. Once it's bedtime, I stay in my bed all night unless I have to use the bathroom, I feel sick, or I have an emergency. I can wake mom or dad if I feel sick or have an emergency. You have to put those caveats in there, which I learned the hard way. So if they are sick or there is an emergency, you want to tell them what they can do. Sometimes falling back to sleep will take a while, but that's okay. I can think about happy things like my favorite train or my favorite lawnmower. And for older kids, a bedtime checklist. For neurodiverse kids with ADHD or autism, this can be really helpful. So, the exact steps that they're doing, going to the bathroom, taking a bath or a shower. You'll see that I have ways to remember everything because I don't really have the best memory, but I always think of the 3 Ps that they have to wash during a bath or a shower, which are pits, armpits, piggies, toes, and privates. You know what those are. So the bedtime checklist also is a way to just communicate what the expectations are. Step 2 is sleep hygiene, and you'll probably see these asterisks all over my presentation today because there are a lot of caveats when it comes to sleep. The initial sleep hygiene or healthy sleep habits include having an adequate opportunity to sleep, a consistent sleep schedule. Now, research has told us for decades that really the tipping point is 2 hours. You don't want a weekend bedtime to be more than 2 hours different than it is during the weekdays or school days. Same with wake up time. And even in younger kids, it's better to have it even less, to have even less variability. But 2 hours is where you start to see the impact on even grades, graduation rates, those kind of things. And if you think about it, it's like living on the East Coast of the United States and then traveling to the West Coast for 2 days and then coming back and doing that every week. Our brain really can't make those adjustments consistently. Everyone, no matter how young or old you are, can have a bedtime routine, and it's really important. Again, going back to the buckets, my colleague Jody Mindell did a study when we were at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia looking at bedtime routines. And of course, we thought bedtime routines would relate to maybe an easier time falling asleep or a shorter time falling asleep. But a bedtime routine relates to so many different things, so many good sleep things, even other things like literacy, nutrition, maternal bonding, parent bonding in general. Everyone needs a bedtime routine. And I put a little asterisk there too, because we're going to talk a little bit more about it. And then stopping electronics before eyes are closed and lights are out. So the first asterisk I put there was opportunity. There are many reputable organizations, the American Academy of Pediatrics, this is from the National Sleep Foundation, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, that give us guidelines about how much sleep kids should get. And in my opinion, you want to go for that dark blue in the middle for most kids, many kids. However, one thing to let you know is that these numbers are not based on studies showing how much sleep kids need. They are based on two things. One, surveys of how much sleep kids at each age are getting. And two, extrapolation from studies like the one I told you about in the beginning, where if you get 30 more minutes of sleep, neurocognitive functioning improves. So I think of these recommendations kind of like green vegetables. There's nothing out there that's going to tell you, okay, if your child eats 2 cups of spinach a day, their reaction time is going to be 5 seconds faster or something like that. And sleep is similar. So how do you know? How do you know what to recommend? Well, this is the way I remember it. 10 at 10. A typical 10-year-old should be getting about 10 hours of sleep per night. If they're younger, they need a little bit more. If they're older, they don't need that much less. Teenagers, actually, I should have said in the previous slide, the study of how much sleep kids need has been done in teenagers, only teenagers. And this was by Mary Carskadden, who's an incredible researcher at Brown, who somehow, this was pre-social media, got teenagers to come to her sleep camp, and they stayed in a house that was really a sleep lab. And what she determined after 2 weeks is that 9.25 hours is how much a typical teenager needs. No one's getting that. 85% of teens are not getting that amount of sleep. However, that is what they technically need. I, especially with kids with autism, would rely on functioning. Are they falling asleep in therapies? Are they really hard to wake up? Keeping in mind that sleepiness in kids shows itself in a really different way than it might in adults. They're not necessarily low energy and lethargic. For some kids, especially neurodiverse kids, you're seeing an increase in hyperactivity, in irritability, in difficulty paying attention. But I would really look at functioning, and especially the culture that we're in right now that kind of strives for that perfection in wellness. I would try to be a little bit looser about it. So if they're functioning okay, then they're probably getting enough sleep for them. Then we get to my second asterisk, where again, I have ways that I try to remember things. For a good bedtime routine, I think about 5 things, 5 S's. One, it should be short. 30 minutes at most, maybe 45 if there's a bath or a shower. It should be sweet. And that does not mean every bedtime routine should have dessert. It means that the bedtime routine should have things that the child likes. So I brought up the teeth brushing example earlier. If your child has a really difficult time with teeth brushing, maybe you do that earlier in the day, a thorough teeth brushing, and then at night you do a shorter one. Many kids that are neurodiverse have challenges with independent reading. I see this all the time because then bedtime is the time that parents want their children to practice reading. And if that's really challenging, maybe do that earlier, not as part of the bedtime routine. We want to keep the temperature down, so to speak. Sensory soothing. So when we are really focused on our senses, it is hard to worry about the past or the future. We're solidly grounded in the present. And for kids, this could involve something like a weighted blanket or a soft blanket. It could even be something like just petting the dog. The fourth S is streamlined. So we don't want to go like upstairs bath, downstairs snack, upstairs books, downstairs bed. We want everything to be going in the same direction, leading to wherever the child is sleeping. And the last is steady. So you want it to be consistent. That said, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, even if we can't do the ideal, it's okay. We still want to move the compass needle, the needle and the compass to the general direction. And so I don't want parents to be discouraged or give up because they can't do a bedtime routine every night. Studies show there's actually a dose response relationship with bedtime routines. So a bedtime routine 3 nights a week is still better than a bedtime routine no nights a week. Okay, my last asterisk, and this is where I've started to say lately, I worry I'm going to be struck by lightning when I bring up electronics because they're such a hot topic. But the latest research on electronics in kids is nuanced. And I'm not recommending electronics, and I'm not saying that they are good for other aspects of development and functioning. But when it comes to sleep, the most recent research shows that all electronics are not terrible for sleep for all kids all the time. If a family comes and they're not already using electronics, I'm not going to recommend electronics. But lately, I've seen things like a family who's watching an episode of Bluey together before they start the bedtime routine. That's fine. And there have been really three main reasons that sleep people have identified that electronics impact sleep. One is increased arousal, so your brain just gets more wound up. The second is the blue light theory. So the research has been around for decades showing that electronics, the specific wavelength blue light, temporarily stops the production of melatonin. And that is true. That has been shown. And I think as a field, we kind of then made the leap that then that must mean they're terrible for sleep. But the more electronics, the impact of electronics has kind of been dismantled, the less we see that this blue light theory is supported. And so, blue blocking sunglasses, the amber screen, sleep mode on the iPad, those things are not necessarily helping because the blue light is not necessarily the problem. The last theory is sleep displacement. And this I have really learned since my book came out because I have to be on social media, which I don't love. But I swear to you, even after like one day of using Instagram, that Instagram knew exactly what I wanted to see right away. Clips from comedians, clips of little kids dancing, clips of dogs. And so the next thing I know, I look up and it's an hour later, and my bedtime is an hour later than I intended it to be. And this is where we see the problem. If someone has a consistent bedtime routine, regardless of electronics, the impact of electronics on sleep is less. In autism, I love this study. It has been shown that the impact of electronics on sleep is really mediated by sensory processing and multiple domains of sensory processing. It's not just visual, it's not just tactile. So any sensory processing impairment does relate to the impact of electronics on sleep. So to answer the question, are electronics catastrophic for sleep? The answer is it depends, and not always. I've worked with lots of families where, having a music video on the iPad is the only way they can get through the bedtime routine. I'm not going to tell them to stop doing that. Research is also showing that for some people, the time that's taken up by electronics is the time that the person would have been awake anyway. And so the electronics might actually lessen the time it takes to fall asleep because it prevents or it distracts us from those anxious, upsetting thoughts, difficulty winding down. So if it's part of a family routine and there's a consistent sleep schedule and you don't have a disaster when they're stopped, I wouldn't worry too much about it. That said, I also wouldn't necessarily recommend electronics. Getting back to the rest of sleep hygiene, these small pieces of sleep hygiene have been, again, studied in astonishing detail. So we know that the best temperature for sleep in adults is about 68 degrees, and in kids it's a little higher, 70 to 71 degrees. We also want it to be dark. A nightlight is fine, and quiet. A sound machine is fine. But the other part of sleep hygiene that's important is daytime. You want to get as much exposure to natural light as possible in the morning. Remember, that sets up your circadian rhythm for the sleep that night. Avoiding caffeine and avoiding naps. Again, remember that sleep takes away that sleep pressure that's needed to fall asleep at night and stay asleep, or at least get back to sleep after those night wakings. Step 3 is sleep associations. Our brain makes connections. It takes shortcuts. It makes connections between whatever it is that you fall asleep with and sleep. Sleep associations are not inherently bad. So there are positive sleep associations. Those are things that can be the same all night long. So a nightlight that stays on all night long, a sound machine that stays on all night long. And the other aspect of it is that you can get more of those things. So you don't want, I wrote about this in my book, but I got like a little special blanket for my son on Etsy, and then I never could get it again. And that was his sleep association. And that did not work out well for me. So whatever thing you have, you want to make sure you can get more of. Negative sleep associations are things that are unwanted. So for example, people feel very strongly about co-sleeping when you really dig into the science in terms of development and, functioning. Co-sleeping or not co-sleeping doesn't really matter. So I always tell parents, do what you want, do what's easiest for you. It's not going to change your child's path in life. What is problematic is if the parent doesn't want to be there. They don't want to be there all night long. They want to sleep on their own. Then that's problematic. A lot of parents have no problem with sleeping with the child or lying down with their child at 7 or 8 at bedtime, but they don't want to be there all night long. And the problem is that the way that you fix those night wakings is by teaching the child to sleep independently at bedtime. I wanted to show you this video, which many of you may have seen before. I really am always looking for a different video, but I love this example of a sleep association. So this baby sleeping, but needs the water to be running in their tiny little hand. And you hope that this household only has tepid, lukewarm water, not too hot and not too cold. But you can see the baby is falling asleep, sleeping with the water on, and waking up as soon as that water gets turned off. As we talked about, managing sleep associations relates back to that idea that night wakings are normal. Whatever you have to fall asleep is what you have to get back to sleep. Normally, I would start with bedtime. And I would just work on bedtime and then have the family do whatever it takes for everyone to get the most sleep they can during the night. Studies show that whether you do all at once, typical cry it out, or it's gradual, you get the same results. I think where it needs to be tailored and individualized, especially in neurodiverse people, is we tend to automatically think that gradual is easier, but for some kids, that's just more transitions, more changes, and so it's harder. So that you would really have to think about, individually based on the family you're working with. In teenagers, sleep associations are more about the bed being only for sleep and sleep being only for the bed. And what I mean about that is that they're not falling asleep in the couch watching TV or in a chair. They're falling asleep and sleeping in their bed and not doing things like homework or eating or other things in the bed. The bed is only for sleep. For some people, for a lot of people, the bed might be the only place that they have. And in that case, we can work with that. So we really try to differentiate the sleep space. So maybe they use a different pillow, they don't get under the covers, they face a different direction. We really work to differentiate the sleep space from the hangout space. But overall, it's not a good idea to be in bed for long periods of time awake. Step 4 is an easy one. All you can do to make sleep happen is set up the right conditions and wait for it to arrive. Sleep is one of the only things that the more you try, the less likely it is to happen. So effort for sleep, not good. The other thing that happens a lot is trackers. Now we have rings, bracelets, iPhone apps, mattress pads, all these things that purport to tell you about sleep. Really, the only way that you know if someone is asleep is by having EEG leads on and looking at their brain waves. Tracking sleep, generally not good. I don't recommend that anyone track their sleep except for a couple of reasons. One is if the child isn't speaking. We don't know. We don't know when they're awake. We don't know that they're asleep. That can be helpful. The other reason is if they are getting adequate sleep, but they're still really sleepy during the day, we might want to see what's going on during the night. But overall, you can't force sleep. Nothing you can do to make yourself sleep, even medications. So all you can do is wait. And taking about 10 to 40 minutes to fall asleep is completely normal. I tell kids a lot of times that the best mind for sleep is calm and busy. We know what the things are for calming down, breathing, muscle relaxation, but you also need the right amount of engagement. And this is what I've learned from the families that I've worked with over the years, is that the right amount of distraction is really key, whether it's counting backwards from 100 by threes, or doing the cognitive shuffle, which is thinking of a word and then every letter in that word, imagining something that starts with that letter. So if I pick bedtime, it would be like bumblebee, bear, basement, whatever. And then I would go on to E. So there are many strategies that help keep that mind sufficiently engaged. And it can be different things. And these are going to be, again, very specific. For some kids, it might be ripping up a piece of paper. For other kids, it might be thinking about the Fibonacci sequence, which is a picture I have up here. The good thing about that, it's a mathematical sequence that is found in nature. It's infinite. So it can go on forever. So I've had more than one kid on the spectrum who does that. But also, again, really depends on the specific person. Just to recap, for adapted CBTI, we want to communicate sleep expectations, have good hygiene, sleep hygiene, which is always necessary, but in autism, definitely not always sufficient. Work on positive sleep associations and then wait for sleep. There is this point where the ideal for sleep meets the real life of families. And I really like to think of things using a good, better, best model. Again, can we move the needle on the compass in the right direction? So even if we can do something, that's great. What else is there besides a behavioral approach? So the evidence out there doesn't support giving a handout. It doesn't support aromatherapy. So even though lavender and chamomile might smell good, they haven't really been shown to impact sleep. If though the person really likes the smell of lavender, go for it. I mean, can be part of a calming bedtime routine. Evidence does support exercise, meditative movement like yoga and Tai Chi, melatonin, medications like clonidine, and there's some support for weighted blankets. There's mixed support and sensory strategies like massage. I want to just briefly talk about melatonin. Again, Beth Mallow has done some great studies on melatonin that have shown that in kids with autism, melatonin is both safe and effective. It works best for falling asleep, although there is an extended release melatonin. So we know it's safe and effective, but the problem in the United States is that it's not regulated. So when you look at studies that have broken down ingredients that are in specific preparations of melatonin, sometimes they don't have any melatonin. Sometimes they have 400 times the melatonin that they say. Sometimes they might have a little Benadryl. So there really is no best brand. This seal that I'm showing you at the bottom is the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Association. I think this is a voluntary supplement organization. And so they are looking for certain brands. There also isn't any specific guideline for dose or timing or formulation, with the exception of the gummies. So the gummies have been shown to be especially unpredictable. I'll say that. So it's better to use the liquid, the chewable, or if the child can swallow pills, there's also an extended release melatonin that's available in the United States and also in Europe. So in summary today, sleep problems impact almost everyone with autism across almost all domains of functioning. We know the risk factors are things like genetics, the underlying mechanisms of sleep, the increased risk of sleep disorders, and comorbidities. And behavioral treatment still is the gold standard. We have to adapt treatment. We have to be flexible. We have to be collaborative. We have to make it specific to that child and family. I would include exercise in my behavioral plan and consider melatonin. And, I've been doing this for a long time, for about 20 years, and I have not ever reached the point where there's nothing else to try. So I would say just keep in your mind, there's always something else. Science is evolving, and there's always something to try. When to refer out or seek help is if the child is falling asleep during school or therapies, having trouble falling asleep most nights, any snoring, gasping, any breathing issues during sleep, they need to have a sleep study, and restless sleep. And even if you just need help making a change, and where do you find a sleep center? Since COVID, there's a lot more telehealth with regard to sleep, but also these four organizations have directories for sleep centers. And I put a page of resources here. That is my book. Beth Mallow also wrote a book in 2014. And then these last books, Pediatric Sleep Problems and A Clinical Guide to Pediatric Sleep, are great books for clinicians. Those two are not for families, but they're for clinicians. And then journals and organizations. And so now I will take any questions. I know we don't have a ton of time, but happy to answer anything.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love it because the whole purpose of the idea, workshops is to give something of use to clinicians. And my God, that's what was so full of that. So I really appreciate that. You're getting a couple of questions in the chat that I'll just read out if you want.
Sure.
What do you say to families about electronics where the child needs to have the TV on to fall asleep, not just use electronics as a piece of the bedtime routine?
That's a good question. So I think if it depends. The answer is it depends. Are they using the TV to fall asleep and then staying asleep the whole night? I probably wouldn't worry about it. There's nothing inherently terrible about electronics and sleep. So there's nothing that if the TV is on that's going to make your sleep necessarily worse directly. But I would probably start with trying to back off of the electronics when eyes are closed. So I would start with maybe putting the TV on a timer, or at least maybe they can be in bed with the TV on. But once lights are out, electronics are gone. I would try to slowly back off if it's really impacting their sleep. But you know as well as I do that these families are coming, they are desperate. And if this is working and the only thing that's working, to be honest, I don't I don't recommend taking it away.
Thank you.
Mm.
Ron said, is a formal overnight sleep study ever indicated for an autistic child? And if so, what signs point to that need?
Yes, all the time. And if someone goes to, I recommend going to a pediatric sleep center. The sleep staff are more experienced with kids. I know at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, they work with all kinds of kids all the time. A sleep study is recommended for two reasons. One is any breathing problem. Obstructive sleep apnea is more common in people with autism. And so you would definitely want to know about that. Any child that snores should have a sleep study, an overnight sleep study. And the second reason is restless sleep. So during sleep, are there movements called periodic limb movements that are waking up the brain? So it's really for those two things. You don't need it for something like trouble falling asleep, but for those two reasons, a sleep study is often indicated.
And Jonathan wrote, this might be linked to that one. Any recs for those who have no trouble falling asleep with bedtime routine, but wake up about 3 or 5 a.m. and are just completely awake?
Yeah, if the child is truly, truly falling asleep independently, positive sleep associations, then you might have to switch your goal to what to do between 5 and 7 a.m. There are also other things like a good morning light, which is not necessarily any specific thing, but a light to come on when it's okay to get out of bed. Many parents will tell you my kid can tell time, they don't need that. But it's much easier to just open their eyes, see the lights off, still time to sleep, lights on, okay, time to get up. So I think cues can help, but also then what can you do to help the family during that early waking if they're not having any consequences during the day and that's just the time they wake up?
What about magnesium for sleep?
So the magnesium in our bodies, incredible, does a lot to calm us down. And in adults, there is some evidence that magnesium helps sleep. That research is not yet out there in kids. And that's not to say that it doesn't help. It's just that the research isn't there. That said, we have to think outside the box a lot of times when we're thinking about autism. And I've had many, many families that have told me that magnesium is helpful. And to be honest, I'm saying this honestly, science is my North Star. I do use it. And I have magnesium spray over here right behind me. So I think as long as it's not dangerous, sometimes it's worth a try.
Yeah, excellent. Any comments on devices like the Alpha Stim?
Yeah, looking at the evidence, it's not really panning out to show that it improves sleep. It might improve other things, but not sleep so far.
Last question from Kat. Is there a training or certification that you can recommend for a psychologist who is interested in increasing their competence in working with kids or families with sleep problems?
I love this idea. I love this question. So, there is a special board certification in behavioral sleep medicine. It's kind of like the neuropsych certification. You have to do a fellowship, so many supervised hours. But there are also sleep experts around who do things like case-based consultation. So Jody Mindell and Lisa Meltzer have a group that meets, I think, weekly. You bring your cases and talk about them. There are listservs, so the pediatric sleep medicine listserv and the behavioral sleep medicine listserv. I would look into joining those, and then you can see where you can get some more supervision and training. But like I said, since COVID, telehealth and teleteaching and telesupervision have all increased. And so there are absolutely ways to increase your knowledge about sleep. The two books that I put on my last slide are great books for clinicians also to learn more about sleep. They don't really focus on neurodiversity. Um, my book and Beth Mallow's book really focus on that, but they are still wonderful books for learning about sleep.
Well, thank you so much. For everybody who doesn't know this, we'll have this recorded talk up within about 2 weeks or sooner on our website, so you can re-access it again to write down all those. If you have any other questions, feel free to email the listserv, and we can try to get them answered for you as well. This is such a great talk. One final thought: my daughter's pissed at me because, like, well, when she was younger, she was like 4 or 5. She had trouble falling asleep because she was so anxious, thinking she had to go to the bathroom. She'd get up over and over. So I gave her uh, a a drug basically and said, take this every night. It will stop you from having to go to the bathroom. Worked like magic. She went to sleep every night, no problem at all. About 10 years later, she found out that was just a Flintstone vitamin that I gave her. So
That works too. Don't underestimate the power of placebo.
placebo works absolutely. So again, thank you. This is so accessible. Everyone run out and buy her book, have it on your
Thank
shelf.
you. Thank you.
I
And you can
really
always email me. You can always reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any. So really feel free.
excellent. Well, thank you so much for your talk.
Thank
Everyone
you.
have a good rest of your May, and we'll see you next month. All right, bye everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.